for updates from one of our favorite guests here on Stacy on the Right. Will Hild is Executive Director of Consumers Research, consumersresearch.org. Thank you so much, Will, for coming back on.
Of course. Always happy to be with you.
Yeah, I am glad that you have some time to discuss this tonight. You have a woke alert on European corporations actually pushing a woke agenda in the U.S. Give us what's new here.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a phenomenon that we've seen from a number of different companies, but we specifically highlighted T-Mobile, Spotify, and IKEA especially. These are companies that are foreign owned, they're foreign founded and foreign headquartered, and yet they seem dead set on pushing a woke cultural agenda here in the United States. And so, again, this is something we've seen from a number of different European companies, especially, seem to be fixated on involving themselves in American cultural politics. And so we just want to call it out for what it is, because these companies should be happy to be doing business here. We're, as our president often notes, we're the best market in the world. So what they shouldn't be doing, and if you go over to somebody's house, you don't start rearranging the paintings and insulting their decor, right? You're a good guest. And so that's what we think these companies should be doing instead of focusing on pushing a woke agenda.
Well, not everybody knows how to be a good guest. There are people who will literally come to your house and insult the decor, insult the food. I mean, there are people like that. So lots of people need lessons. And I'm glad you guys are willing to take the time to teach these corporations, because IKEA makes a lot of money in the U.S. I mean, their stores are enormous, and we never see an IKEA closing. We only see them opening.
That is true. That is true. Which I don't know how, because I've been through IKEA a couple times. I think there even used to be an old joke on 30 Rock, the show, about how many relationships going through IKEA has ruined. I don't know if you've ever been through one with your paramour or not, but you don't. It's not for the faint of heart.
We've been through it together, but only a couple of times. See, how I do it is good. I'll ask one of my kids. They'll say, I want this or that. And I'm like, well, they probably have it at IKEA. And what we do is we make a day out of it, but only with me and one other of the kids, maybe me and both daughters. I would never take my son there. He's a young adult man, and he does not like those massive stores that you can't find your way out of. And my husband is very good natured, but we've been married for a long time. I know how it works. If we're going to IKEA, it's for something very specific. We're going to take all the shortcuts and we're going to get in and out. And, yeah, you're right. One does not just simply wander into IKEA with a loved one if you want problems.
That's right. I'm an in and out kind of guy. So IKEA, because you're like signing up. It's like signing up to go to Disney World. You're not. There's no like, I'm just going to ride one ride and then get out. So that's the problem for me, is I'm ready to go about 5 minutes after we get there, and there's still an hour left to go through the whole store. But yeah, these companies, they're pushing hardcore transgender ideology. They're pushing LGBTQ agenda, and this is something we're seeing from Europeans in general. I've been on your show many times to talk about the ESG grift and how that's being effectuated. One of the biggest players in ESG, you think it'd be the Russians or the Chinese trying to undermine the United States energy security. It's actually the Norwegians, a country of only 5 million people, but they have a sovereign wealth fund of nearly $1 trillion. And they've used that fund to invest in a ton of American companies and then push a net zero agenda, which is ironic because Norway, 60% of their exports is petroleum products. I mean, they're basically, John McCain used to make the joke about Russia that they were a gas station with a country attached to it. Well, that's literally true with Norway, and yet they use their sovereign wealth fund, the wealth generated from all of those exports, to push a far-left woke net zero agenda here in the United States. So these companies, these foreign governments, this is something that we see very, very often, is they want to intervene in our culture and in our politics here in the United States and push us to go woke.
So this is what we need to do. Oh, my gosh. That's why President Trump wants us to have one of our own. I'm on Wikipedia, but there are other websites you can go to find out about this. The Government Pension Fund Global is the English translation, established in 1990. So it's not even that old. and it invests surplus revenues of the Norwegian petroleum sector. And as of March of 2025, it had over US 1.738 trillion in assets, holding on average 1.5% of all the world's listed companies. It is the world's largest single sovereign wealth fund in terms of global assets under management. So each Norwegian citizen, their share of that value is $325,000. We have about $325,000 of debt per American citizen. They have assets per Norwegian citizen. Wow.
That's exactly right. I think it would be great for us to have that because I'd much rather have that amount in assets than debt for sure. That said, they have used that, unfortunately, not to just make sure that their citizens are wealthy and have all the assets and retirement that they need for their future, but to push a political agenda. And I think one of the things that's been the most damaging is, as much as I like to attack BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard, three of the largest asset managers, for pushing a woke left agenda with the assets that they have under management, I'm only going to let them off the hook a tiny, tiny bit here. Part of the reason that they all decided to do that is because the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund and the Japanese Sovereign Wealth Fund, they both made a decision and an announcement that they would only allow people, asset managers, vendors, to manage money for them if the asset manager would agree to use all of their assets under management to push net zero. So what I mean by that is, it'd be like if you went to a lawyer and you said, listen, I want you to represent me. I have a lot of money. I'm going to pay you a lot of money. But in order to get my business, you have to do what I say for all your other clients. I don't care what they think anymore. You're going to represent them the way I want you to represent. Now that's absurd, obviously, and anyone who found out that their lawyer was doing that to them should and would fire them. But that's what the Norwegian and Japanese sovereign wealth funds did to get the asset managers here in the United States to start pushing a woke left agenda when it came to net zero. They said, listen, you got to start using Kentucky's pension dollars. You got to start using Florida's pension dollars, Texas, North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi. You got to use all of your assets under management when you walk into that boardroom at Exxon or Chevron or at the utilities, Duke Energy in Southeast, Evergy in Kansas. You have to use all of those assets to push the net zero agenda. So this is not something that the Europeans do accidentally. This is a targeted strategy. And that's unfortunate because we like to think of our European as cousins and as allies. And in many cases they are. But in this particular case, both in the way that their corporations act when they operate here and the way that their sovereign wealth funds have behaved over the last 10, 20 years, they are really undermining American interests and national security and prosperity.
So here's my issue. I have three issues. The first one is, number one, why wouldn't America, BlackRock, all of those, why wouldn't they have immediately gone to whoever was president at the time and said, look, we've got the Norwegians and they have a sovereign wealth fund and they won't invest in American companies unless we do X, Y, and Z with the net zero agenda, which is antithetical to what we're doing here. We're a petroleum-based society. We need, net zero doesn't work for us. So why don't we reverse it? And they're not really doing anything new. The second issue is all they're doing is the same thing we've done to them when it comes to defense, which leads me to the third issue. Why are we providing the defense for Norway? Why are we contributing 79% of NATO or some astronomical amount when they have $325,000 per Norwegian citizen? Why doesn't Norway contribute more to NATO? Why aren't they more of a heavy hitter instead of them influencing net zero policy around the world? Why don't they provide more national defense for not just themselves, but for their neighbors? We need our own sovereign wealth fund. President Trump is doing that. But we also need to say to BlackRock and all these other investors, you need to push an American agenda or pensions. And, companies like Evergy, they have pensions. You would see those pensions divest themselves of the woke agenda. We don't want our assets under management for a pension with a wealth manager that's going to push an agenda that's antithetical to what American society is built on, which is petroleum. Our entire society is built on petroleum. So, none of this makes sense. I understand what you're saying. I'm not saying what you're saying doesn't make sense. The fact that we went about it in this way and followed the Norwegians, a tiny country, largely homogenous, nothing like America, that we would allow them to dictate policy to us is ludicrous. In response to them saying, well, we won't invest, we should have said, so for every dollar you don't invest is a dollar that we divest out of your country when it comes to defense. It's another airplane that will not go up if you need help. We will no longer support your being a part of NATO. Who's doing these negotiations for us? Gosh.
That's exactly right, Stacy. And this is, Trump hasn't talked about this particular, niche issue, but this is the overarching point that he's made, is that Republican or Democrat, we haven't had a president really pushing actual American citizens' interests in so very long. And I'll even add an even finer point to make what was done to us by the Norwegians and the Japanese Sovereign Wealth Fund even more egregious. One of the things that BlackRock manages is about 80% of the federal thrift savings plan. That's the pension fund for our federal workers and our military. And you'd think they would be more concerned about losing that. It's slightly smaller than the Norwegian fund. I think it's like a little bit over $1 trillion. But you would think that an American-based asset manager like State Street, like BlackRock, like Vanguard, would be way more concerned about drawing the ire of the U.S. government, right, and the regulators here in the United States if they felt that all of the rules against breaching fiduciary duty and conflicts of interest were going to be enforced. So what it means is that not only did they cave to demands of a tiny little country of 5 million people in, almost in the Arctic, right? But they did so because they knew that not only was the government not going to save them from the demands of this country, they weren't going to enforce the rules against them caving to these interests. In other words, they wouldn't come after BlackRock for this conflict of interest, even when they're managing our pension funds for our U.S. military, our armed forces. The same people, as you noted, who now, because all these Scandinavian countries want to join NATO, are now sworn to go help, Germany or Sweden if they get invaded by the Soviet Union or some other country, right? So they are undermining U.S. interests at the same time that we are subsidizing their defense. That is such an incredible point that you bring up. And it's why we shouldn't be putting up with this. And I hope that one of the things, the priorities for Trump's State Department over the next 3.5 years is to politely and, study up all the books and find out whether you bow or shake hands or which, fork you use at the table. Go over there politely and tactfully. Tell them they need to cut this out, and if they keep doing it, they're going to be facing whatever security risks they have in the future by themselves, because no guarantor of anyone's security would normally put up with this kind of undermining of their economic security. And it's not just the Norwegians. I picked on them tonight because they are kind of the biggest and the worst. But the Danish were doing this. The Danish, this is a real niche issue, but I think it speaks to how fervent they are in trying to intervene in our politics. There's a group here in the United States called the State Financial Officers Foundation. It's really just the Republican Treasurers Association. It's got auditors and comptrollers and treasurers, mostly Republicans from across the country, who are part of this association. They can talk to each other, share best practices, kind of thing. But one of the things that SFOF does is push back against the ESG and the woke agenda. And there was a asset manager called Federated Hermes that operated both the United States and Europe and gave money to SFOF. And these crazy people that throw canned soup at paintings and glue themselves to the road and everything in Europe, they're called Extinction Rebellion. They attacked Federated Hermes in the UK, actually painted their headquarters with orange paint and protested all this stuff for giving money to an association of Republican state treasurers here in the United States because they were pushing back on the issue. And the Danish pension funds, 4 Danish government pension funds, followed up on this by saying if Federated Hermes didn't stop giving money to SFOF, they would take out all the money that Federated Hermes was investing on behalf of these pension funds. So I bring that up. I know that's a lot of different players and a lot of different issues. My point is this. You have European pension funds trying to influence elections and politics here at the state level here in the United States. Why are we putting up with this? Why are we putting up with corporations like T-Mobile, Spotify, and IKEA involving themselves in our cultural issues? Why are we putting up with sovereign wealth funds and Danish pension funds getting involved in state election issues here in the United States? And it just goes to show you everything you're saying is correct. We need to lay down the law with these people. First of all, they should probably be paying for their own defense. But if we're going to be subsidizing it, then they need to get out of our politics.
Yeah. I remember talking about Larry Fink and BlackRock and, net zero, and they were doing the same kind of bullying tactics here in the U.S., which were done to them. And I get it. People want to push back on the United States because we have had, these kind of difficult conversations when we're sitting at the table. We do tend to get our way. We do tend to say, we need you to do this, this, and that. And the other countries might be tired of that paradigm. But the way to get out of us telling you what to do is to provide your own defense. So you put your own F-15s, F-16s, F-22s, Tomahawks. You put your own SR-71s. You put your own B-2 bombers, your own C-130s, C-131s. You put all of your own jets, pilots. You raise an army of 1.5 million. You dominate air, space, land, and sea. And then you don't have to worry about us doing that for you. And if we're not doing that for you, then when we sit at the table with you, it's a seating of equals and we can negotiate from that terminology. But the idea that we would allow any country to bully us when we're the ones who spill our blood and treasure abroad all over the world, protecting and serving these nations, it's ludicrous to me. I don't understand. And I feel like this is the tipping point for not just me, but for so many Americans who have had family members serve this country. We are sitting up here, we're providing the most crucial, the most critical asset of all. Yes, their sovereign wealth fund is impressive and dynamic and, wish we had one. Hopefully we will by the end of President Trump's second term. But at the end of the day, what we have now is the largest standing military on the face of the planet. We are number one on World Power Index for military strength and might. And we're the government, military, and people that other nations want defending and protecting them. And the nations that don't have our defense, they don't want to come up against us directly. They would rather try to take our country down from the inside through immigration and through all kinds of other policies. For those that we protect to stand up against us and raise their middle finger and try to influence policy within this country, it's just, I just don't understand. I honestly, it's like someone living in your house and eating all of your food and you're using up your heating and your cooling and even having you to buy their clothes and pay their car note and stuff. And then when it comes down to it and you just ask them to sweep a floor or mop or just lock the door on your way out, they can't do it. We can't keep being those people. We're being taken advantage of. And I think that's why President Trump has been so pissed off, on top of all the lawfare. He's been upset because we've been taken advantage of for so long. And Americans are just used to it because all we do is work. And they're off the whole month of August. They're off almost a quarter of the year in these foreign countries because they don't have to pay for their own defense because we're doing it. And we work the most days out of any other nation on the planet. Americans work the most days. So, I'm just tired. I'm beyond it, Will. I'm over it.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and I'll do a step even further. Let me stretch your analogy probably farther than I should, but imagine that person was living in your house doing all the things that you just said, eating your food, using your power, using your water, you're paying the bills, and then they save up a bunch of money and invite your girlfriend out to take her to dinner, right? These people are using money that should have been going to their defense, paying their bills, work they should have been doing. Then they could stand on their own 2 feet. They could do whatever they want in their country. But they are storing up acorns that should have been paid for their defense, and they're using those acorns to invest in American companies and then push them to self-destruct through these insane net zero agenda. And if Europe, as we've seen, my understanding is Germany is about 10% down in industrial output since the beginning of the Ukrainian war. And that's not because they're losing anything to the Ukrainian war, but because they had made themselves dependent on European cheap energy from Russia. And so when that disappeared, suddenly they couldn't. They're not competitive industrial anymore. So their energy policy, their green nonsense, their over-reliance on foreign natural gas instead of developing their own energy security has destroyed their economy. And instead of realizing the error of their ways, thanking God that they live under the security umbrella of the United States, so it's not an absolute geopolitical catastrophe from them, and repenting and fixing it, all they want to do is push us to go the same direction that they went, and to make us have as bad a footing as they have. It's just fundamentally a unsustainable relationship between us and Europe. I have a lot of European friends. They're wonderful people. But in terms of their government structures and the agenda that their governments have, it's just not a sustainable relationship between us and the United States.
Yep. And I tell you, Will, this isn't about the people. You know, we have great people here in this country, and look at who our president was last 4 years. My gosh, if people judged us by our presidents, we'd be in trouble.
Stacey, I'm not sure we know who our president was last 4 years.
Well, you know what? Good save there.
We're still trying to figure that out.
we are in the throes of a reckoning that is just it's rocking us to our core. But at least I can give us credit for actually having that reckoning, right? Not just sweeping it under the rug and saying, just forget about it. It's over. It's good to actually look back and say, look, the bad things were done, and we want to know who was at the root of it. Who held the auto pen for Joe Biden? Let's find that out. And I think they are going to find it out. And I love Europeans. I love Europe. I grew up in Germany. I love Europe. If you want to go someplace and have a good time, nothing like it. And to learn so much about history that starts from before the 250 years that we've been here in America. Old countries, lots of historical value and wonderful, wonderful things to learn. At the end of the day, we are still basically their parent. All of these countries, from Canada to all of the European nations, they were just talking smack a few weeks back when President Trump had that dust up with Zelensky in the Oval Office about how they were going to raise an army of 10,000. And then they lowered that to 5,000. And then they realized they've lost track of a few 100,000 reservists that they're supposed to know where they are so they can call them up. They don't know where they are. There are 500 million Europeans in the EU. We only have 340 million here, 40 of which are illegal aliens, by the way. And we have an army of 1.4 million. So they couldn't raise 10,000 people in addition to the people they already have on active duty. They're not in a position to tell us anything about net zero or anything else. It's almost as if we don't know who we are, like we have amnesia or something. Like we're not aware that we rode in and saved them in World War II. And that was the most recent time. And we also have taken all the responsibility for the Middle East, not in our neighborhood, but still. We've taken all the responsibility for Ukraine, also not in our neighborhood, but still. So we got to wake up and shake ourselves and say, who are we? Oh, that's right. We're America, and we're not perfect. And by all means, do your own thing. You don't have to be like us, but carry your own weight. That's the demand that President Trump has been making. And it's the one that I think we should continue to support, even not just through the Trump administration, part 2, but into the future with our next president, who I sincerely hope and pray will be a Republican.
Well, amen to all of that. I don't even know that I have anything to add except to just say that I support it all, and I hope that we have a robust, productive relationship with Europe. But I think it needs a reset, and I'm very excited about Trump's State Department, and especially former Senator Rubio pushing back on a lot of the assumptions that Europe has had about our role in the world and what they can rely on us to do without any kind of recompense or even respect for the work that we do for them.
Yep, I agree. Well, it's always an informative pleasure when you join us here on Stacy on the Right on SiriusXM. Everyone, you got to go to Consumers Research. There's so much more to learn there than even the topics that we cover so much when Will joins us. It's consumersresearch.org, consumersresearch.org. Support their work. You can also sign up for their alerts, the woke alert that we discussed tonight, and others. Will Hild is executive director there. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us tonight.
Always love coming on. Thanks for having me.
All right.